Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Olson with the National Tile Contractors Association. Again, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinar today. Today's webinar is titled Interior and Exterior Installation Standards for Gauged Porcelain Tile and is sponsored and presented by MAPE. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to remind you that during the webinar, you will be muted. Please use the questions area on your computer to type in your questions, and we will answer as many and all if possible at the end of this presentation. If the audio on your computer is poor, call the number on the invite to this webinar and listen on your phone. As a reminder, all of our webinars are available to watch at any time on the NTCA YouTube channel shortly after this webinar is presented, giving you easier access to watch and or share all current and past programs at your convenience. All right, here we go. I'm very honored to introduce today's speaker, Jim Whitfield. FCSI CCPR LEDAP is the Director of Technical Services at MAPE. He's actively involved in the development of tile industry standards on TCNA, ANSI, and ISO committees. Jim is an NTCA ambassador and a proud member of the NTCA Technical Committee. He is the current president of the MMSA, Material Methods and Standards Association. In addition, the Construction Specification Institute, CSI, honored Jim with fellowship in 2001. Thank you, Jim. Welcome, and I look forward to another great program.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Great for the opportunity to present this. I presented this program last year when we first passed. I think we were very close to passing the exterior standard for installation. The interior one was done a few years ago, but I hope an overview of these standards is beneficial. I'll start with just kind of a overview of the GPT in general, the manufacturing process a little bit, not much. Then we'll get into what really kind of makes this kind of exciting. And I think there's a lot of benefits in GPT and opportunities for us to install large gauge porcelain tile in places we've never thought of installing tile before. So, one thing that's important with any new product category is that we have some standards. We'll talk about that and the development of those standards, as well as what it really means to get something approved through the consensus process. So this is a traditional porcelain tile press, if you might. It presses a powder, if you might, and anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 tons of force. The one you see on the left from SACME is 7,500 tons of force. And that's how it's put into a die, a recessed die filled with powder and then compressed, very, very dense. And that's the beginning of a traditional tile. There are limitations on that. And that tile that you see being held by a couple of gentlemen from the TCNA lab is the largest pressed tile that you can make, which is about 4 foot by 4 foot. So what you see commonly today in a big tile and 10 millimeters or about 3/8 inch thickness is a 2 foot by 4 foot. And the gentleman on the right is installing a very large one as well. This is what makes gauge porcelain tile different. This happens to be a laminum machine. This happens to be from Panaria in Italy. I was over there a few years ago. I mean, gosh, now 7, 8 years ago. And you can see on the bottom left where the powder, if you might, what used to be restrained within a die on the traditional side is now just out there laying in a specified thickness on a oh my God, I can't think what you call those things that are moving. It's just being moved down through the machine. It's being compressed by 2 flat metal plates right above where the Panaria logo is.
Is it a conveyor belt?
Conveyor belt. My goodness, I could not think of that. Thank you, Jim. Is right above where the Panaria Group logo is. That's where it's being compressed up to 15,000 tons of force. So you're taking this powder that you see in the bottom left, and as it comes out of the kiln, it looks like what you see in the upper right-hand corner. very, very thin. I've seen it as thin as 3 millimeters. What's more common is 3.5, recommended for walls only. 3.5 and with mesh, but this is a different process, same principle though. It's a powder going down through the machine. This is a round drum, and this is what's called a Continuum Plus by Sacme. But you can see they could create some pretty large tiles. Why are we only seeing 5 foot by 10 foot? Well, I think a lot of cases, there's really not a lot of limitation to size anymore. It's more about what can be handled practically. And so that's what you see there. But you can see the graphics on the one on the left. Incredible. In this picture here, you see, again, thin gauge porcelain tile. On the middle picture is a thick gauge porcelain tile. So that same powder can be run out much thicker and as much as 30 millimeters or about 1 inch and 3/16. Or you see 2 cm pretty commonly, 3 cm, about 3/4 of an inch thickness, used in landscaping, a variety of different things, pedestal systems and so on. So gauge porcelain tile sizes are anywhere from 1 meter by 3 meters or 5'3" by 10'5", 1,000 millimeters. And as I said, thickness is anywhere from 3 millimeter to 30. So thin to thick. As a matter of fact, TCNA has recently announced that they have been working on a thick gauge porcelain tile standard as well. So that hopefully will go in publication soon. We're going to focus more on the thinner stuff because that's more common today. But I really want to stress this, and this is a kiln that you see in the bottom right, and this technology is here to stay. I mean, think about it. It's one, a new innovation, and it has some major manufacturing advantages. Manufacturer can produce large panels and put them up on the shelf and then cut them into any size they want later. So there's some real advantages here. This takes less raw materials and less energy or fuel, if you might. The kiln, it doesn't have to stay in the kiln quite as long to produce it. So think about this. It's more sustainable, less raw materials, less time to produce, less expensive to ship, very, very easy to drill and cut. Pretty much just score it with a glass cutter and snap it. And again, there's the large variety of sizes and shapes that can be cut out of one single panel. So some huge advantages in this. And I really believe that's why this is here to stay. And the innovation that we're starting to see, again, like thick tiles now, really interesting. Let's talk about product standards. Why do we have them? Well, so this gentleman on the left doesn't have bruises all over his rear end. That's why we have them. We want consistency in testing to establish a quality level. And that's what we're doing with the gauge porcelain tile product standards as well as installation. We want to make sure that people have the ability to be very, very successful in installing these panels. Otherwise, they'd get a very bad name. So really build confidence in a new product category and to establish a reference standard that a design professional, as an example, can call it out. So previous to having standards for the product, about the only way you could call out a gauge porcelain tile was to say Crossville's laminum, or to say Deltile's panoramic, or whoever whoever's manufacturing. In other words, you had to be proprietary. Now with the installation standard and the product standard, you can actually call it out by ANSI standards. So there's a huge benefit in that. It opens up the category quite a bit too, but also establishes a quality level for a product that's needed. Let's talk a little bit about consensus. What you see on the right is a ANSI meeting, I believe, and it takes about, there's about 65 people typically in an ANSI meeting, and that's just at the table, but with a variety of different interests. So you'll have everything from a person like myself, a setting material manufacturer, to a tile manufacturer, to users. What I mean by users are American Institute of Architects, CSI, Plywood Association. So there's a variety of different people that come to the table. Installers, the union, consultants. So the committee is composed of a lot of different people, but consensus means that general agreement. That's probably the best way to explain it. We put a standard out there and it takes a long time sometimes for them to pass. We've been working on ready to use grout or premixed grout for probably 8 years. Uncoupling, longer than that, 12 years. The interesting thing about the gauge porcelain tile standard for product as well as interior installation is they both pass in about 18 to 24 months. So when there's a real need to get it done, I think the industry pulls together very, very well, and we can be much quicker in trying to get something like that done. So gauge porcelain tile TCNA Handbook. We found that the TCNA Handbook really doesn't represent gauge porcelain tile methods very well. And so a small group of people sat down and tried to propose 16 methods out of the TCNA Handbook and basically alter them to include gauge porcelain tile. After going through that process, it was determined that it was too encumbersome. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. And so we started to create installation methods directly related to gauge porcelain tile and gauge porcelain tile panels / slabs. So you'll see on the next slide the beginning of some of those corrections when we were just trying to use a TCNA method. Eventually what you'll see is a handbook that's going to come out. It'll have the GPT product standard, installation standard for interior and exterior, as well as TCNA handbook methods. So we're pretty excited about that, but that is a big process too. It takes a lot of time. Whoa, whoa. There we go. So this is an example of one that a few of us worked on, and we actually were using the TCNA handbook method now. Trying to grab an arrow. So this is an existing method, and we changed it to include gauge porcelain tile as well. So in addition to, oh no, I'm sorry, this one has been corrected specific to gauge porcelain tile. So you'll see the ceramic tile and glass tile have been deleted, and service ratings are a little bit different. So there's some specific requirements for GPT that won't be in the typical TCNA method. And so that's how you see this process starting to be done. Once a few of us went through and did edits like this, we turned it over to a group of contractors, tile contractors and labor and NTCA, and they went through it and they suggested changes. We eventually met at surfaces, oh gosh, now I'm gonna say it's 1.5 years ago, and we agreed on 2 methods. And so from that, the TCNA staff can take and alter the rest of the methods. In other words, we agreed on format, basic principles of writing, you know, how it should be read, how it should be written, I should say. And so once we've established that for a floor and a wall, then TCNA staff can go and edit the rest of them. So a lot of work has gone into this. I'd tell you right now that the GPT methods for the TCNA handbook have probably been worked on for 4 years now, at least. So it's a lot of work, but hopefully we'll have a great tool when we get done. That's the goal anyway. Let's talk a little bit about gauge porcelain tile and gauge porcelain tile porcelain panels / slabs and the standards. So these are all fairly new standards. ANSI A108.20 is the tile standard. So how to produce the tile, I mean, how much strength it should have, how much for impact, how much for modulus of rupture, et cetera, et cetera. That's within the standard. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. ANSI A108.19 is the interior installation standard. The new one passed last year was A108.20, the exterior installation standard. Below that, you'll see the website or the link to TCNA's website for these publications. This booklet you see on the right is a small handbook specific to gauge porcelain tile. It includes the material and both installation standards published just this year. So that's kind of exciting. Let's talk about standards and how we came about doing it. So when we first started to put our heads together on how to create an installation standard, one thing we wanted was consensus, as I said. So it was organized that we could go to a tile manufacturing facility and install tiles as a group, the people that had interest in it, and get a comfort level, if you might, for the method of the testing that we were doing. And say that the installation method that we're using is suitable. So we did all kinds of installations. This panel here had a 3mm square notch trowel on the tile and a size 6 Romandi slant ridge on the substrate, or vice versa. 3mm on the substrate, 6 slant ridge on the tile. And then we used a 10 slant ridge and 6. You can see both Euros. And of course, we beat the tiles in and measured the thickness afterwards. And you see that was 3/16. This is 1/8 of an inch, a large and a medium. These are just different trowel names from different manufacturers. I think we used, obviously, the Euro Notch trowel by ETM. We used Rubies, Superiors, a variety of different ones, Romandi. So again, different methods and different sizes of trowels, and just look to see what gave us the best coverage, the easiest. We simulated a framed wall in metal stud as well as wood framing, and then installed tiles all over those. These are after the tiles have been removed. We're checking for coverage, and the tiles are laid down in front of it right there. Coverage is kind of difficult when you're looking at a tile that's 5 foot by 10 or 3 foot by 10. So we came up with a method by using a plastic sheet, breaking it down to smaller sizes, measure the coverage within that square, and then basically calculate that. So here's that plastic sheet that we laid over the thin set after it was beat in and the tile was removed. And you can see in every single square we measured voids, every single square. That looks a little bit like this. This one used Euro Notch on both the tile as well as the substrate. We installed a 1mm by 1mm, the amount of void, the width of the void, the length of the void, and completely calculated it all out to see what our actual coverage on the average was. So in all those installations, our average was 97% coverage in the worst area. Same thing over here, and we had 96.65 coverage after measuring it all. So really, we got a pretty good comfort level with where we wanted to go with coverage and how to achieve the best coverage. What else did we learn? Well, we learned that a wet mortar disruption, in other words, when you set tile, beat it in well, lift it back up, isn't the best example of what your coverage is actually going to be. Because what happens is, as you pull it up, of course, you get all these mountains or peaks and valleys because you're disturbing the thin set. So we didn't find that to be as effective as once it dried. So the next day we had to come back and remove it. This one here shows you, we used a Romandi flow ridge trowel, both 8, and then tapped in with a grout float here. And on this one, you used the vibrating sander. You can see how much better the coverage was. We measured everything. We installed it different ways. We walked it in. We put stand-up vibrator machines on it, 2x4s with carpet on it. I mean, we used a variety of different methods. Euro Notch. Again, 98% coverage. 93%. That was a full sheet. Simulated block wall. Again, different methods of tapping it in gave us different percentages of coverage. So let's talk about the product standard briefly. So the term became gauged, you know, the emphasis being on thickness, not whether it's thin or thick. And that really lent itself well because, again, now we've got 2 centimeter or 3/4 inch tiles coming out in gauge porcelain as well. Gauge porcelain tile is less than a square meter. So if you've got one that is 36 by 18, that would be considered a gauge porcelain tile. Gauge porcelain tile panels / slabs, again, you want to talk about a consensus process. The name for this is panels / slabs because some people wanted panels, some people wanted slabs. That's consensus. 1 meter by 1 meter or 1 square meter and larger is considered a panel or slab. That is consensus, people. The product standard includes measuring for nominal thickness from 5 millimeter to 6.5 for floors and walls, with or without mesh reinforcement, like you see here on the back of this one, or being applied there. 7-day submerged test for strength with mesh, and then the mesh itself is also checked for absorption as the tile is. Table 5 includes products for walls, and that's 3.5 to 4.9 millimeter. So thinner materials for walls, thicker materials for floors. Makes sense. And here is table 4, table 5. Again, nominal thickness of 5 to 6.5 and 3.5 to 4. Whatever it is. And some of the requirements for nominal thickness, modulus of rupture, bond breaking strength, thickness variation, stain resistance, chemical resistance, DCOF. So all the typical things you would see in a tile standard. One thing that's unique to the product standard that we never had before is the Robinson test. The Robinson test is something that we use in the tile industry commonly. It's to test a tile assembly. So here at MAPE, as an example, if I want to test my 5 millimeter recycled rubber sound membrane and see how it affects an installation system compared to thin set direct concrete, this is how I do it. And what happens is we put a gypsum bedding down here, then a 4-inch concrete slab, and we set our tile to it, again, with a polymer modified mortar. Or in this case, I put another panel together exactly like this, but I also put a 5 millimeter recycled rubber membrane in there. And then we run this test, very consistent, whether in our case, we use a universal machine, as you see here on the left, and it comes down from the top and applies weights. What you see on the right is the traditional Robinson. So it's done from the center yoke, and it goes around in a circle. Different weights are added per wheel. In this case, I can get my weight right directly over the wheel. This is our old Robinson with the safety thing removed so that we could do actual joist testing of gauge porcelain tile and see how it performs. So that's uncommon. You don't typically see it like that. And nor do you see these large extensions off it, usually smaller like that. Anyway, so let's talk about this. The loading schedule for testing, or the cycling. When all of the test assemblies, and this includes gauge porcelain tile, is included in the product standard, is a Robinson test. So in the first cycle, 100 pounds with a soft rubber wheel. You can see a soft rubber wheel here, and that may be a hard rubber, but a soft rubber wheel here. So 3 wheels are installed. We put 100 pounds over each wheel and rotate it 900 times over the tile assembly. We're looking for a broken grout joint. We're looking for chipped tile or spalling or anything like that. Second cycle, 200 pounds per wheel, 900 times. Third cycle and fourth cycle, 300 pounds over each wheel, 1,800 times. Then you change it out to a hard rubber wheel. Again, 100 pounds over each wheel, 900 times. 200 pounds over each wheel, 900 times. 300 pounds, 900 times. An additional run of 300 pounds over each wheel, 900 times. Then we change out the wheels for steel wheels. It starts off with 50 pounds per wheel, 450 cycles, then 100 pounds, then 150 pounds, 200 pounds, 450 cycles with each one of those weights. So you complete 14 cycles, steel wheels. It's an incredible demanding test. on the tile assembly. And you can imagine if I've got a recycled rubber membrane in there, 5 millimeters, it's not going to perform as well as if I'm bonded direct to the concrete slab, right? And that's what we typically see. What you might be more familiar with is the service ratings that we see in the TCNA Handbook, whether it's extra heavy, heavy, moderate, light, or residential. If I only make it through the first 3 cycles, and I must make it through it, not to it. In other words, if it fails on the 4th cycle, I will get a residential rating. If it fails after 6 cycles, I'll get a light commercial rating. If it fails after 10 cycles, I'll get a moderate commercial rating. 12 cycles, heavy, and extra heavy for completing all 14 cycles. So that's what we use. In the case of gauge porcelain tile, the minimum requirement per the ANSI A137.3 product standard is it must get light commercial. So it has to complete 6 cycles with wheels as we went through earlier. So I hope that helps, because this is the only place in all the tile standards that we actually use the Robinson test. We use it in product standards like sound reduction and other things as well, but not in tile. And this is a typical break, if you might, when you're doing gauge porcelain tile. It doesn't break like across the tile, it actually spalls. Some additional strength is breaking strength. You've got 175 pounds per foot on table 4, 85 on table 5, 5 being the thinner material. 6,000 PSI for modulus or rupture in 137.3 on all products. Let's get to what we really wanted to talk about, and that's the installation standards and the new exciting exterior standard. The exterior standard is what I'm really going to focus on today, because that's the new one. The interior standard I've presented many times, and hopefully you're familiar with it. If not, go to TCNA website and get publications and pull down that book. But some of the sections, there's 19 sections to the standard, starting with substrates, existing surfaces and substrates, related work specified in other sections, substrate flatness, general substrate requirements, job site requirements, material handling requirements. That's a unique one to gauge porcelain tile, right? And we don't usually see that in installation standards. Tile specification and ordering, again, very specific to gauge porcelain tile. The installing contractor, which includes qualified labor language, general requirements for installation, mortar and mortar mixing, the application of bonding mortar, embedding of the tile, required mortar coverage, grouting of the tile, workmanship, lippage, grout joint size, movement joints, preventing damage to tile work, and maintenance. I will not go through each section, but I will cover a lot of these. Substrates. What are suitable substrates when it comes to gauge porcelain tile? Well, mortar bed, cement backer unit, concrete, CMU. What you don't see there is plywood. We don't recommend that gauge porcelain tile be bonded directly to a plywood substrate. You should put cement backer unit on it first. Existing surfaces. The language in the handbook says determining the soundness and suitability of the existing surface or substrate shall be the responsibility of the building owner, design professional, general contractor. That's important language for the tile contractors out there. This really puts you're just asked to cover it. You're not asked to say that it's suitable. So if you're going over something that already had tile on it, or for that matter, like this brick wall like you see here, the responsibility of that structure, which you had nothing to do with, is of the building owner, design professional, or the general contractor, not you, the tile contractor. You'll see a lot of tile contractor friendly language in here, I think, because again, it's part of the consensus process and it's a good thing. You know, we're trying to protect the tile installer. Related work. Good example of related work could be caulking. You know, it's commonly in a different division, even in a specification. Could be windows themselves, sills. In the standard itself, it says grounds, anchors, plugs, hangers, door frames, Electrical, mechanical, blocking, frame, flashing, embeds, accessories, and other work in or behind the tile shall be installed before the tile work is started. So what we're trying to do, of course, is prevent other trades from coming in and ruining our work. Substrate flatness. Substrate flatness, or the substrate tolerances, if you might, are the exact same that it is for all tile. But just to cover it, when tiles are with one edge 15 inches or longer, the maximum allowable variation is 1/8 of an inch and 10 feet when measured with a straight edge, and no more than 1/16 of an inch and 24 inches. Again, this is no different than the industry standard, the other industry standards for tile installation, but we really wanted to stress it for gauge porcelain tile because they're large panels, it has to be flat. Also within the substrate requirements is all surface preparation and remediation are not part of the installing contractor's scope of work. The reason why this is added is because what happens a lot of times is a contractor bids to put tile on this wall, and then gets out there and finds out it's not flat. Well, is leveling that wall back out the requirement of the tile contractor to install the tile? Well, yes, it is, but he didn't bid that. So all this says is that I did not bid it, and so that's going to be a separate contract or change order, whatever, then, however, depending on how it's accepted. That the owner should communicate to the contractor where tile's going so that the project is built properly for it. So you can anticipate the load as well as weight and setting bed. This is an important issue. I mean, if you had a project where maybe they had what they call EQ studs or equivalent studs, steel studs, a 20 gauge stud is not always 20 gauges. It could be thinner, but because of the shape of it and so on, it says it's equal to a 20 gauge stud. The important part there is that it requires blocking and things like that in order for it to support a good tile installation. And so this puts the burden of the substrate on the contractor, not the installer. During the installation, there should be adequate and designated room to work. That's, again, another gauge porcelain tile statement that you wouldn't typically see in a tile standard, installation standard. But when you're dealing with tiles as large as 5 foot by 10 foot, you can't be expected to do that in a small hallway. Protection during and after the installation is the general contractor's responsibility. Cover and protection from sunlight, rain, freezing weather in general. During the installation and curing period, roof systems, flashings, metal caps must be installed and properly tied into the veneer assembly as soon as practical to ensure proper protection of the assembly. This is a problem we're seeing a lot in tile today, especially exterior. You're asked to go out and you do the exterior of a fast food restaurant. I see it a lot there. Or it could be a large building like we see in this picture. They're all good with you getting the tile up there, but the main thing is once you get the tile installed, you have to be careful of the weather, the rain, etc. I mean, once you get the tile installed and the grout installed, then all of a sudden the top is open and they don't put the flashing up on the parapet, water's running directly into your wall. You're going to have some very, very colorful grout. You're going to have probably some latex leaching out of the setting material or it's a big issue. We need to, in order for the installation to cure out properly, we really need to be protected from getting water and rain, as an example, inside the system. And that probably doesn't sound like a big issue, but we see it day in and day out today. The amount of exteriors we're doing today is much more than we had in the past. And the organization, if you might, or well, really the organization of the construction site, you know, you need to stop when you're doing gauge porcelain tile and talk to the GC and say, look, I need to have this protected from the top as I'm doing the installation and as quickly as possible afterwards, so we don't fill that wall up with rain. I'm not so worried about the rain creating bonding issues so much as it really coming out and leaching out through the tile and the grout joints and so on later, and possibly leaching latex. Again, material handling responsibilities. This is really specific to gauge porcelain tile. You need to have extended forks on a fork truck. If you go to pick up a gauge porcelain tile pallet and you've only got traditional short forks on it, you're going to bust the tiles right as you tip it back. So 84-inch forks are required. It should be pre-planned on how to deliver full pieces to the site. Sometimes you're not going to get fork trucks everywhere. So, you need to be able to move that material around on a job site as well. You're not going to take a 5-foot by 10-foot piece in an elevator up to the 3rd floor, more than likely. That's going to have to be organized ahead of time, maybe a sky hook, a sky lift or something like that. Proper use of suction cup frames for larger sizes is necessary. And the reason for that is it provides structure to it. These tiles are very flexible almost and can work on a radius or curve. So they really require a spine, if you might, and that's what this rack here does. It may require specific, specially designed suction cups. So if you got a lot of texture in the finish of that tile, you might have to have some unique suction cups. I've seen ones with foam, a variety of different things. But here's probably a door cutout. Here's the base, and then you can see where this little L shape's going to go up around the door. So he's got little extensions all throughout it just to make sure that that stays well supported. The installing contractor, we recommend qualified labor in the standard. That means that the installers had training on gauge porcelain tile. We do them here. I know some tile manufacturers do it. What the standard says is that contractors should have knowledge of this type of installation, have the proper equipment. They either can go to ACT, CTEF, and take an advanced certification tile installer for gauge porcelain tile. This is the standard or the class right here. That they've completed a comprehensive installation training program from a steady material manufacturer or tile manufacturer. Good example of that is like Gerald doing this one here for a bunch of installers a few years ago here at Mapei. And I know Crossville also held trainings for a long time. I know we do them quite frequently in other manufacturers' warehouses. A union installer that's completed a program with IMI or the National Tile Contractors Association 5-star members, or others programs specified by the specifier or architect. Some general requirements for installation: don't install over unsatisfactory surfaces. The design professional or building owner shall consult with the tile, membrane, and setting material manufacturer regarding the type of membrane, if using one. Not all membranes are suitable for all applications. This really talks about, as an example, that 5mm recycled rubber membrane. I would not recommend that on a floor with a gauge porcelain tile. But there's a variety of my other membranes we commonly do. Probably the easiest one to consider when you're doing gauge porcelain tile is the liquid applied crack isolation and or waterproofing membranes, because they maintain such a thin profile. Tiles meeting ANSI A137.3 intended for this stand to be installed into the standard must be suitable for the area being used, specified by the product party responsible for their selection, commonly the design professional or building owner. You don't want to put gauge porcelain tile in a pathway between a commercial kitchen and a restaurant where they're putting steel wheel carts through there all the time, or for that matter, maybe in a mall where they're pushing steel wheel carts around. Generally, steel wheel carts are not recommended. Sorry about that. I got excited, touched it twice. The application of the bonding mortar. You can see we have a little bit different trowels. This is that Ramondi slant ridge, and this is the Euro notch, ETM. Surface saturated dry, wet down, absorbative substrates. You're going to trowel out roughly, a 5 by 10 tile plus that same area on the substrate. In almost all cases, the substrate's going to be more absorbative. So trowel out the tile first, and then trowel the mortar on the substrate. So you have the most open time in both cases. In the case of cement board, concrete, etc., SSD at first. Make sure it's wet. No standing water, no pooling, just surface saturated dry. Use special trowels that don't require pushing and sliding to achieve ridge collapse. Key in the mortar with the flat side of the trowel, then gauge with the notch side. Use a suction cup frame as talked about earlier. Use a weighted coated beading paddle. That's what you see here. Then use a high-speed orbital sander, at least around the outside edge. Work from the center line of the gauge porcelain tile to the edge, line by line, all the way out. This will collapse the ridges, force the air out from behind, and minimize edge-to-edge mortar, maximize edge-to-edge mortar coverage. Lippage control devices, as you see here, the MLTs in this case, are required for anything larger than 1 meter by 1 meter. The use of a vibrating sander to exploit thixotropic properties of the mortar. Thixotropic is, let me explain. A lot of our mortars are thixotropic. What that means is, you know, when you take a ketchup bottle and you turn it upside down, the ketchup doesn't want to come out. So you shake it and that creates shear, then it starts to flow. That's true of these mortars, a lot of the mortars today too. We can notch them, they hold their ridges very, very well. But as soon as we create movement, the mortar starts to shear and increases coverage. I hope that makes sense. That's why using a vibrating sander around the outside edge is very, very beneficial. Clean all the mortar from the joint while the mortar is fresh. Can't stress this enough. You do not want to be buying 2 5x10 or 3x10 gauge porcelain tile panels because you're scraping mortar out 3 days later with a screwdriver and you chip both of them. Not a good idea. In the case of the lippage devices, you can actually get them in there, get the panels fairly level, take the device back off, just the cap, clean out around it, and then put the cap back on for security. Required mortar coverage. In walls, it's 80% in a single square foot. That's very different. That's for an exterior standard. So for regular porcelain tile, let's say a 12x24, you're required to have 95% coverage on an exterior. This is 80%, but it's also a much larger panel with much more contact and mortar to it. So we see that being very successful. No voids should exceed 2 square inches, and coverage should be sufficient to support the edges and corners. Can't stress that enough. We really want to make sure that edges and corners are well supported. So make sure you trowel edge to edge on both the substrate as well as the tile itself. Grouting a tile. Allowable lippage is 1/32, which is the exact same for any tile today, any porcelain tile today. For a traditional tile with an 8/4 inch joint or less. Gauge porcelain tile can be set in a 50% offset. You know, we really promote the 33% offset with other tiles, and that's to minimize the amount of warpage that we see in the tile. And in the case of gauge porcelain tile, we really don't have any warpage, so 50% offset is okay. Many people recommend on an exterior that all the joints be sealant instead of any grout. So if you've got a 5x10 panel and you got to have a movement joint every 8 to 12 feet, figure it out. You might as well use sealant, right? And that's what this is all about. So this is just an informative note within the standard saying, you know, you might want to consider that. Workmanship, lippage, and grout joint size. Again, we talked about this allowable lippage, but the grout joints shall be 3 times the size of the variation in the tile, never less than 1/16 of an inch. Many manufacturers of gauge porcelain tile have specific recommendations for exteriors, so please consult their technical manual or them if you're not sure. I know many that require no less than 1/4 inch on an exterior. And again, that's just to allow for expansion, contraction, and so on. Again, they could be set in 50% offset. Movement joints, yes, they're a good idea. Movement joints are essential in every tile installation, but especially when they're exterior and especially when they're tiles that are very large. So in addition to perimeter, you've got outside and inside corners. Follow EJ 171, that's the best guidance at this point. There's nothing unique or new to gauge porcelain tile, other than EJ171. That, again, the requirements for that is typically your movement joints are every 8 to 12 feet on an exterior installation. So when you're dealing with tiles that are 10 feet, yeah, you might as well use sealant. After completion and cleaning, the obligation of the installing contractor ceases as to damage or injury that may be done to the tile work by others. So once you're done and off the job, it really shouldn't be your responsibility to protect that. Avoid damage to the finished tile assembly. Schedule installations to begin only and after structural work, building enclosure, interior work in close proximity or abutment to the exterior structure that may affect the exterior tile be completed. Maintenance. Maintenance is the responsibility of the owner. That's the tile, the movement joints, sealants, etc. So that's really what this is all about. Again, make sure that proper cleaning is being done, that it's maintained properly. That can't be the responsibility of the installer when he hasn't been out to the job in 5 years. All right, we're going to wrap this up. In summary, carefully review the product and installation standards. I strongly suggest you go to TCNA website and in the publication section and get those standards if you're doing a gauge porcelain tile installation, interior or exterior. Follow the tile and setting material manufacturers' recommendations, especially for exterior installations. Many manufacturers of gauge porcelain tile have a listing of adhesives in the back for different uses, whether it's interior, exterior, walls, floors, size of the tile, etc. And they reach out to us as setting material manufacturers, and usually a variety of different ones. And so you can get go to their technical manual and get an idea what your favorite setting material manufacturer recommends for this type of tile. And we do the testing too. We do bond tests, we do a variety of things, which is also required in the product standard. Make sure the type of installation is approved for its intended use, whether it's an interior, exterior, interior, wall floor, and the proper service rating. Gauge porcelain tiles and very large format tiles are a great opportunity for trained quality tile installers. I can't stress it enough. If you get training on gauge porcelain tile, get comfortable with gauge porcelain tile on a few installations, it's a unique opportunity for the right contractors. You will separate yourself from everybody and their brother trying to bid on some projects. Work with a setting material manufacturer, tool, or tile manufacturer to establish a training program for education and help on specific applications. Feel free to reach out to us. We're more than willing to help. We've all got 800 numbers. The tile manufacturers do as well. Reach out, we'll help. Sometimes, depending on the installation, it makes a lot of sense to try and do a dry installation. When you're dealing with tiles that large, it takes a variety of different people to put up one panel. You want to make sure what everybody's doing, that they understand their role and how that tile is going to go to the wall. As an example, typically you'll hover it right before the wall and then kind of push it in fairly square. But who's got the top, who's got the bottom, who's going to do the beading in, who's going to do the troweling, et cetera, have it all planned out. Definitely to your advantage. It's the only way you're going to become efficient at it as well. Use the proper gauge porcelain tile tools, trowels, and limbage control systems. And I strongly suggest that tile contractors become qualified installers of gauge porcelain tile, either through a tile manufacturer, setting material manufacturer, NTCA regional trainings, or the ACT program. Ask questions. If you're not sure, ask questions. What you do not want to do is have a bunch of questions after the installation because of failure. That's what we're trying to prevent. Ask all the questions you want on the front end. We all have 800 numbers. We're more than willing to help in any way we can and help you get successful in that project. That's what it's all about. In order for this unique tile with an incredible look to really catch and grow, it's going to take good installers, good quality installers that understand the products, the materials, what it's like to level out a wall. As a setting material manufacturer, we've got mortar specific for gauge porcelain tile. We've got an adhesive specific for gauge porcelain tile. we've got patching compounds for walls that'll go over drywall or gypsum. And that's because of Gage porcelain tile. That was something that we noticed with all of our underlayments and other things that we have in our tool belt, if you might. One thing we really didn't have was a installer-friendly wall leveling material. So, you know, really we had to take a look at this very, very well. And I think we've got an excellent line of materials that complement Gage porcelain tile and the installer. So anyway, with that, I'll be wrapping up. If there's any questions, I'm glad to try to address them. Yes, sir.
Jim, great job. What a lot of information out there, a lot of really good information for everybody. I do want to stress a couple things before we get to questions. Mark Heinlein, one of our trainers, mentioned to me that we should stress the fact that NTCA does do approximately 40 regional training. They're all-day training events for GPTP, and please come to the NTCA website and look on our calendar at the bottom of our homepage. It will list those sites and where you can register. They're free. They are an all-day event, and I would say everybody that's gone to one, and Jim, you guys have helped work these and sponsor them for us, and they've been very successful and very important. Jim also mentioned ACT. With ACT, you do need to be a CTI certified installer before you can get to ACT. So we want to do that, but there is a specific GPTP ACT program certification that is out there. So there's lots of education out there, and we definitely want to make sure that you know about those and we use them. Also, I wanted to just mention the fact that you should always contact the panel manufacturer to learn their requirements for minimum width of grout joints. It may be wider than the minimum joint width for interiors when you're doing exterior work. So it's not always the same. So Jim mentioned the fact that you need to contact your manufacturers, not just your setting material, but the panel manufacturers also. Get as much information as you can. As Jim said, these panels are very expensive. You do not want to lose one of them, break one of them, or many of them, and it's very important. So Jim, great information, phenomenal. At this point, I only have one question, so if anyone else wants to type a question in there, here's their question. Please describe an exterior outside corner movement joint with backerboard substrate, including width. Wow.
Well,
did you get?
So
I'm not so sure I completely understand the question. Do you, Jim?
Me neither. Not
Okay.
exactly. I think
So
the question's the outside corner, though. I mean,
right.
And that's an appearance. You could do, there's a variety of ways to handle any outside corner with Gage porcelain tile, and exterior would be no different, except the fact that you got sealant closing that joint instead of an epoxy or something like that. So, you know, one of the things that I know on all the tile installers, Facebook pages and so on, is they're very proud of how they can slip a dollar bill, if you might, into a mitered corner, outside corner. That may not be the safest thing interior. I mean, two sharp edges, but you really have to think about that. And I know that NTCA and the reference manual has a good document on that. So
correct. Not only that, Jim, I think there are many trim manufacturers that make a trim outside corner piece that are fantastic, and that's the way I would probably recommend going.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think, you know, again, you certainly can have one tile overlapping the other and still have a sealant joint in there. It's just to accommodate expansion and contraction. That's it. The cement board, I don't really have anything to say as far as how to install that. That's follow the manufacturer's recommendations. It's not my deal.
Right.
But obviously, and I'm not a huge fan of cement board installations exterior. I mean, I think they perform well. Don't misunderstand me, but I think a complete system, like a mud wall, if you might, or stucco base, for that matter, in my opinion, is by far the better system because it drains from the top to the bottom. But and cement board can drain as well, but just it's a little bit more cumbersome because of all the panels. So, but I know they're commonly done. Don't misunderstand me. I see them come through my office day in and day out. But I honestly think the best system is a complete plaster type system of cement.
And I think if anyone wants to talk about that a little bit more, your email address is here on the
Sure.
front, and you can definitely, they could reach out to you, and I think
Yeah,
that'd be
because
great.
I may misunderstand the question, like you said, Jim.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, feel free to write me and I'll help in any way I can.
So this is we try to be non-proprietary here, and we appreciate you presenting this, and it's sponsored by MAPE. And a question came up, and it says, what length of exterior warranty does MAPE offer? Can you answer that, or would you rather
Sure.
do that on okay,
No,
great.
it's available on our website, so anybody can look at it, but we've got as much as a lifetime warranty. Lifetime of the building.
Great. Wow, that's fantastic. All right, how about the width of a CBU joint and the width of a GPT? Cement board unit joint and then a GPT width of a
I'm not sure I understand
joint.
the question.
I don't either.
So depends on the board and how you install it. And I'm not going to get into that. I'd suggest you look at the board, your favorite board, and look it up and find out what they recommend, if they want to butt tight or if they want to have spacing in between. And more than likely, they're going to want to have some spacing. But GPT, as Jim said, the minimum joint for gauge porcelain tile, period, is the 1/16 of an inch. Now, most manufacturers recommend much wider than that in an exterior. Interior, I'm sure you can get away with the 1/16 of an inch, but exterior, consult the manufacturer. Before I came to work at MAPE, I was working for a tile manufacturer, and the recommendations were, oh gosh, it was 5/8 of an inch in the case of an exterior. So they're very specific about that. And I believe some of the others have recommendations similar to that.
So Jim, let's be really clear on this. So Charles, I just want you to know, we're not trying to avoid it, but you would want to go to your cement board manufacturer and talk to them, and to the panel manufacturer and talk to them, the GPTP panel manufacturer. It's very important that you reach out to them and get their recommendations on what they recommend. So I don't want to avoid this question because I think it's a good one, but it's also something I think you need to go to the manufacturers for directly.
And I think that's the proper answer is you're not going to get all your answers in one place. And I think we said that in this presentation quite often.
Yep.
Setting material manufacturer and tile manufacturer and so on. You should be reaching out to them and making sure, where there's agreement, and if there's differences, find out why.
All right, Jim. So when will TCNA have the methods for both interior and exterior application?
I do know that they're working on them, that they're actively working on them. I review some, Noah reviews them first, and sometimes I see them as well. And I don't know, the gentleman who was originally involved with that program is no longer there, but I know it's been moved over to somebody else. And having just come back from the shows, we've been busy getting ready for industry meetings, and they were too. So there's a lot going on right now. Hopefully soon. I mean, I really would like to see it in the next year or so, but.
Do you see this GPTP manufacturing technology influencing and changing traditional tile production?
Well, yes, it already has. I'll give you a good example. And I was not aware of this till we were just at coverings in an ANSI meeting, and I had a very knowledgeable tile manufacturer sitting next to me, Noah Chitty. And we were talking about, I assumed that the 2 centimeter or the 2 cm, thick porcelain tile that we're seeing today is all being done with the gauge porcelain tile type technology that I showed you on the front end of it coming out on a conveyor belt. Thank you for that word, Jim. In a thicker pour, right? And being still compressed by tons and tons of force. But I found out that some of these smaller ones, 2 foot by 2 foot, 2 centimeters thick, are being done through the traditional dust press method. So that kind of really astounded me. I had no idea that the thick ones were being done like that. And I believe there's some being done in the United States specifically that way. So I found that very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think there's going to be big changes, continue to be changes too, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, with large format tile, that's one thing that's popular in both sizes, right? Whether it's 3 millimeters or whether it's 10 or 3/8 of an inch thick. Large format tiles, some of these suction cups and things like that are very, very helpful to a tile installer when trying to pick up something that large. So yeah, I certainly can see how that could influence it as well.
Yeah, including tools, right? I agree with you. Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, here's a good one. do you run into any issues or hear about issues with grout joint specifications on the exterior? And then EJ 171, do they need when they need different widths, or do they need different widths?
EJ 171 has requirements for different types of tile, but not whether it's interior or exterior that I'm aware of. There's more frequency with a movement joint exterior than there is interior. But there's no requirement that it be thicker that I'm aware of. And I may be wrong, but I'm not aware of anything that says yet go whatever, 1/4 inch or something like that if it's an exterior. And that would be very difficult to do with glass tile and some of those types of things.
So it sort of runs along with EJ 171 on a whole, where a lot of your expansion or movement joints, end up being a little wider than a grout joint, right? I mean, that's part of what we deal with in regular tile, not just GPTP. And again, that comes down to the architect and the designer and everything. It's really not, it's not the tile contractors, it's their problem, but it's not really their decision.
They're not the ones who should be designing it.
Exactly.
That should be done by the design professional.
All right. So Charles said he's apologizing for opening a can of worms on the cement board in the corner. So
no, they're good questions. I
agree.
Having those answered by them.
And then we've got quite a few people saying, great job, Jim. Thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody, thank you for attending. We will have more webinars coming up this year. Your invites will be coming soon. Thanks for attending, and enjoy the rest of your summer and stay safe, everybody. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.